All right, hello again. Good afternoon for those of you who are on the East Coast, and good morning on the West Coast. Welcome to our webinar on mastering TestRail integration with Ranorex Studio. My name is Jackie King, and I'll be moderating today's session. And with me is Jason Branham. Jason, you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Jason is a sales engineer here at Ranorex, and he'll be conducting the live demonstration portion of our webinar. This webinar is being recorded so that you can watch it again later or share it with others on your team.
All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Jason Branham, and I'm a sales engineer here at Ranorex. It's a pleasure to be your host today. Just to give you a little background on myself, I have been with the company close to 5 years now, and I have a automation background and a development background as well. So real quick, with introductions out of the way, do want to just repeat that this webinar is recorded, and you'll get a follow-up email including a link to download the video, and also that you can submit your questions using that Q&A panel. Definitely, if any questions pop up, reach out to us through that Q&A panel. We have two other engineers in the audience who are going to help answer those. Very good, so let's actually get into the content here. First off, this webinar is kind of an intermediate level. So if you have some basic understanding of Ranorex or TestRail, you'll be in a good place. We're going to try to get it within 45, 50 minutes here. And again, time permitting, that will allow us to have a questions and answers at the end. Also a good resource, if you haven't been there yet, our website has an online user guide. We're going to use it a little bit here today, but it's a great place to get yourself started up and working well in Ranorex. So allow me to very quickly reintroduce the agenda. I'm going to have a few overview slides to go through, but the major chunk of this will be the live demo in the middle there. After the demonstration, we'll wrap things up with a couple of summary slides, and then again, time permitting, we'll open it up for questions. So allow me to do my quick overview here, my elevator speech, if you will. What is Ranorex? So Ranorex is an all-in-one test automation tool, and by that we mean it's a very accessible tool that you don't have to be a developer to use, and you can automate tests against your desktop applications like Java, SAP, your web applications, even newer technologies like HTML5, AngularJS, Node, all that good stuff, as well as your mobile applications, and that's whether it's a native application, a hybrid application, or even doing web testing on your mobile device, whether it's iOS or Android. Our claim to fame is really about same-day productivity. I mentioned it's a very accessible tool. We want something that even a manual tester can pick up and start creating automation on day one. And of course, tests are the most important part of a test, rather, is that we're able to report on what's working, what's going wrong in our application. So we do include powerful reporting features, lots of different ways to share that report and different formats to generate that report in. Now we do have a codeless solution here, but you can actually work with our fully integrated IDE to write C# or VB.NET code, and that allows you to extend your test, sometimes beyond the functional side. But of course, the codeless approach is great for those who do not want to write any code, and that is all the features that we develop are for making that easier for everyone to use. So Ranorex makes testing easy. That I just mentioned there, the recording functionality, the click and go recorder, allows you to basically go in, hit the record button, do a manual test as you always have, and at the end you'll have an automation. Not only that, but from a higher level perspective, more of a management perspective, you can create a hierarchical structure, right? We can have test suites and test cases. And inside those, we'll show here in a bit, we will use modules or keywords to create your test structure. Also, as mentioned for some of the developers in the audience, we will allow you to also complement your test using some code. Again, the languages you can utilize are C# or VB.NET, and that is the full object-oriented version of those languages, not like C# script or anything. So you have a lot of extensibility. Those test reports that you design or create are going to be highly modifiable, highly configurable. You can customize them. and of course integrate those into your reporting, whatever reporting functionality you have on the kind of test management side of things, obviously TestRail included, as we'll see today. And not only that, but we also fit into other environments. So CI environments like Jenkins, TeamCity, Azure DevOps, source control environments like Git, Subversion, TFS, and of course, test management, again, like we'll show today here with TestRail, but also the others like HPQC, for instance. So that's a little bit about Ranorex. Now let's introduce TestRail. What is TestRail? So it's a modern test case management software, runs either on-premise or in the cloud. We'll be using the cloud version of this, but they're identical for all intents and purposes. And this allows, the test management team, the managers, to see kind of how their tests are working. The QA department has a nice dashboard here to look at and kind of track what is going on with our test. Not only that, but TestRail can further integrate into things like Jira, other bug tracking tools as well, and of course, Ranorex Studio. And as mentioned, there's kind of two approaches. You can either have an on-premise, we'll be using cloud-based, but the UI we work with here is a web-based one. On this slide, real quick, I have one last little poll for us to conduct here. It looked like a lot of you have not had an opportunity to work with Ranorex yet, but maybe we could see, what is your experience with TestRail? How many of you are coming from the TestRail side of things? Leave it up for a few more moments here. All right, excellent. It looks like the majority of you have actually used TestRail, either for over a year, let's share the results here, or just recently. So there are still some that have not had a chance yet to use TestRail. So we'll try to introduce things very lightly here. We're not going to go too deep, as we only have a little chunk of time here to work with. But yeah, it looks like a good mix there, and happy to see a lot of people coming here from the TestRail side of things. Hopefully what we show you today in Ranorex will be interesting to you, and we'll let you check it out. All right, so back to the slides here. We are going to get into the live demonstration shortly. But first, how do these two guys interface with each other? How does Ranorex and TestRail work together? And that's what we're going to demonstrate here today. First off, anything I create in Ranorex, I can then export into TestRail. So we use a lot of the same vocabulary in Ranorex and TestRail. So a lot of the language here will be pretty familiar to you probably if you're coming from the TestRail side. On the Ranorex side, we can create test cases and export those to TestRail, and vice versa. We can take something that's already created in TestRail, a test case, let's say, and import it into our Ranorex environment. So it's kind of an export-import thing, on the face of it. Now, beyond that, once these two are connected, you can very easily synchronize. So changes you make to your, let's say, your test case in TestRail, you can synchronize and see those changes back here in Ranorex, and vice versa. And probably most importantly, when we run our automation from Ranorex, if they are synced together, then your results are going to appear in the TestRail environment. That's really kind of the meat and potatoes of everything, right? The ability to see how our tests are doing. And without further ado, let's get into the live demo here. Now I have a quick little rundown, or checkboxes, if you will, of what we're going to show. But first of all, just to give you some background on the application I'll be automating today, it is the little demo application that we include. You can get to this either by the link I'm showing here, or a little bit easier probably is just go into our website and go to the user guide. The very first section of our user guide is called Ranorize Yourself in 20 Minutes. There you'll see a link also to download this demo application. Let me give you just a brief kind of rundown of what it looks like. Once you've downloaded that demo application, it's basically a little UI here, a desktop-based application that we can test various things. For instance, our first test is going to be right here on this introduction tab. or I can enter my name and submit it, and we expect some changes to happen in our application. That's what our first little test will be doing, kind of validating that this works correctly. But this is a good app to download and just kind of play with Ranorex with, because we have a lot of sections in here that do different things. For instance, here is a test database where I can do some data entry, add an entry to my database table over here and do some validations. Very good for testing out the data-driven functionality within Ranorex, which we will show tomorrow on our desktop webinar. So highly recommend, if you're interested, you go attend that webinar. I have some things where we could show image-based approaches, various UI elements here like trees and expanded collapse. Upload testing, where we want to look at things like timing, synchronization. And finally, a tab here for dynamic IDs. So if you're working with an application that has maybe a dynamic framework, like AngularJS, for instance, how Ranorex can deal with those types of situations. So again, this is our sample application. We'll have a very short little test here that I've already created to look at, where we test this first introduction tab, and that's the test that we will be exporting into our TestRail environment. So just a little preview there. What we're going to learn today, kind of step by step. First, we're going to show, as soon as I get off the slide here, what the TestRail environment looks like. We'll also give a brief look at the Ranorex Studio environment, maybe spend a little bit more time there since a lot of you are very new to it or haven't even seen it yet. We'll show you how we can connect the two together. Our first demonstration of using this integration is going to be exporting, again, that little test we create against that demo application into TestRail. Steps for doing so. On the other hand, we'll switch over to TestRail, maybe create a test case or modify one, and show you how to take that test case from TestRail and import it into a Ranorex Studio project and then automate it. And some additional topics we'll probably hit along the way, right? We, of course, are going to show Ranorex Studio, show you how those results that we get from Ranorex Studio look inside the TestRail environment. And once we import from TestRail, we'll show you how to build up a quick test from scratch using Ranorex Studio. And of course, probably some tips and tricks here and there in between. So let's first start off with showing you TestRail, my demo account here. I'll just need to open the browser and go to my login page for TestRail. I have it bookmarked here. But when you start a TestRail, if you're getting to the TestRail environment, let's say you're starting with a demo, you will get a URL here, and this will be unique to your environment, right? Mine's called Ranorex integration.testrail. So those of you who obviously have been using the tool for a while, TestRail for a while, this isn't any news to you. We need that URL for integrating into Ranorex, but first let me just log in here into my admin account. And you just see I have a pretty bare bones TestRail dashboard here. I have one project currently sitting in my dashboard, but nothing else. No test runs to speak of, so our graph here is a little boring, but we will change that very quickly. One thing I want to point out is that one setting that you need to consider when you're doing this integration, and we'll see this again once we start up the wizard, but if you're in TestRail, you'll need to go to the Administration tab, and the only thing you need to verify that's turned on is under Site Settings in the Administration tab. And then the API tab here, there's a little checkbox here, Enable API. Now this is something you need to do for any type of integration that TestRail supports. So many of you have probably already done this. But again, once we get into Ranorex Studio and we start the integration up, we have a little wizard that will definitely remind you of this. But a quick show there that that's really the only kind of settings change you need to make on the TestRail side. Go back out to my dashboard here. We'll leave this up and let's go ahead and introduce Ranorex Studio now, since that's definitely more new for you guys. So I have a couple of Ranorex Studio projects already here on my desktop and also the demo app there. Let's start with the introduction project here. As you can see, everything that Ranorex creates is file-based. So my whole test is stored within this folder. And if I jump into that folder, here's what we have, what we call a Ranorex solution. So I mentioned that, kind of the language beneath Ranorex is C# or VB.NET. Really, this is just a .NET project for any developers in the audience. As a matter of fact, not only do we generate a Ranorex solution, but side by side with that, we generate a Visual Studio compatible solution as well. So you can actually open this test in either environment, Ranorex Studio or Visual Studio. And changes you make in one or the other will reflect on the other flavor, let's say, of solution. So this is a full .NET project at the end of the day. I'm going to go ahead and open the Ranorex solution, which should open our tool, our environment, Ranorex Studio, and give you a brief tour of that. So let's maximize it here. And so after opening this solution file, we have a quick look at the main view here of Ranorex. We call this the test suite view. And as you can see in the middle, this test suite has the name introduction. And inside of this test suite, we have currently one test case. And that test case is made up of one or many modules that define, what it does, basically. So I use the word module and keyword kind of interchangeably here. So these modules are what you'll actually build up through the recording process. You can do it through recording. There's other ways to work, of course. But in general, the quickest way is to use the recorder. Let's quickly look into one of these modules and give you a quick glance at what it looks like here. By double-clicking that recording one module, I'm inside of its view here. And we could see an action table up above. Nice, easy, human-readable steps. Storyboard as well to kind of keep us visually aware of what's going on. As you can see here, this recording one, it clicks on an object called enter your name, then types in the word Alice, then clicks the submit button. Here we have a validation where we expect that message, right, to update. It should say welcome Alice. And here I just made a quick screenshot of the application. So very, very simple test. Again, if you're interested in how these are actually built up and more of the structure components, definitely attend our webinar tomorrow, the desktop webinar. Highly recommend it. We can't go too deep in this today, as obviously we want to show the integration side the most. But again, the terminology here is very, very similar to what you see in TestRail, right? In TestRail, you can also have a test suite in your project, and that test suite can contain one or many test cases. So nothing really new there. So let's get on with actually integrating this into TestRail. Now, to do so is pretty straightforward. We have a wizard built in. So with Ranorex Studio open, looking at your project here, you'll go to the Tools menu on the toolbar. And in there, you'll see a TestRail integration kind of fly out here. Now, you'll need to sign in. I haven't signed in yet, but we do have this wizard here. We'll really hold your hand and walk you through the steps. So let's go ahead and start the TestRail wizard. Again, here it shows you that you want to go in and make sure you've activated the Enable API checkbox. Again, that's in the Administration, Site Settings, API section of TestRail. Obviously, the user here is going to be importing and exporting. So you just want to make sure they have the appropriate permissions, whoever's logged in right now, that they can create test cases and delete them, basically, is the permission we're talking about there. We'll talk about these other two when we get to the importing side of things, importing from TestRail, that when you create a test case in TestRail, you just need to select the automation type Ranorex. But again, I'll go through more detail once we get to that part of our demonstration here. So I'll just simply hit continue. Now I need to give my URL, that server URL that I mentioned. Right, it's different for everyone, but it's what takes you to your TestRail dashboard here. So I just got to make sure that's correct here. It looks like it is. I provide my username, my email in this case, and then a password. This is my TestRail password. I can choose to save this credentials and sign in. All right, so it's going to test my connection, and we get a checkbox if everything went well. Otherwise, we get an X. So that would just mean basically your URL's wrong, or maybe your credentials are wrong. Looks like we're good though, so we'll continue here. Now, the first thing we want to show is exporting, right? Exporting what I've done here in Ranorex into the TestRail environment. So this test suite is called Introduction. I have a test case here called Test Case. Maybe we ought to give that a better name, but we'll leave it there for now as just Test Case. And then we'll export this structure into the TestRail environment. So I'll choose Export to TestRail. All right, so I could have multiple test cases here. They'll all go if I so choose. All right, so the next menu allows me to make that choice. First off, are we going to update a project in TestRail, or are we going to create a brand new one? Let's go with creating a brand new one here. And then off to the right here, I see basically what test suites do I want to export. Well, I only have the one, Introduction, here. Now, it is possible to have multiple test suites in your Ranorex project, but here we just have the one. So I'll say, I could say export all. That's going to be the same pretty much as saying export just this one, since we only have one. So let's choose export all and click export. So we're sending that to TestRail. Export complete. What changed? Well, we added the test case here of the not very creative name, Test Case, to our new project in TestRail. So we can hit finish here. Now, the only thing that changes really visually on the Ranorex side of things, this project now has a little TestRail kind of icon. That's new. And also this test case that we exported, it has a little link here. If you double click this, it's going to take you right into TestRail through your browser. Now, this takes you right to the particular test case here. Let's back it up a bit and go back out to the dashboard and see that not only do we have that test case, but we also have that new project created of the same name, Introduction. We'll click it in here. And then inside Introduction, we can look at what test suites and test cases are available inside here. And it's just the one, right? Our test case. Now the structure did come over completely, so what we see visually in our steps of this test case are what we see inside the Ranorex view as well, basically one-to-one, right? We got a setup region where we start the application under test, recording one, and then exit AUT in the teardown section there. So just a little best practice, I guess, is that when you're creating these modules in Ranorex, you want to give them nice keyword names, right? Recording one isn't a very good name, and that shows because my steps here doesn't really tell me much about what it does, right? Start and exit are pretty straightforward, but I probably want to have given better names here as a best practice so that when I export, I have more meaningful steps in the TestRail side. We'll see that again when we import. We'll show you how these keywords can kind of match up one-to-one. But that works. We exported now. So let's talk about running. We have kind of two parts, right? We have exporting it into TestRail. And so far, we've just shown how to get that set up. We demonstrated what the TestRail environment looks like, what the Ranorex Studio environment looks like, and again, how to connect them and then export. Let's work on this last part here. We haven't checked this box off yet, technically. I'm going to run this test, and I want whatever I run to report back into the TestRail environment. So there are kind of two ways to run my test now that I've exported it. I can run it locally, so you have a run button here on the test suite view, or a run button here on the toolbar. Now this is just running it locally, and it's not putting the results in TestRail. I'll get the results locally, of course, but if I want to get it into TestRail as well, I'm going to utilize this new section of the toolbar that opens up. This opens up after you connect, right, through the wizard to your TestRail instance. You'll have a little play button here, which basically, again, it's going to run locally, but the results are not just going to appear locally, they're also going to be updated in the TestRail instance. So let's go ahead and press that play button. Now it's going to tell me where do you want these results to go. Let's create a test run manually in TestRail first. I know most of you are coming from the TestRail environment, but we can have Ranorex create the test run, or we can even have one existing already. So this test case in introduction has no test run yet. So let's add one on the TestRail side first. We'll choose the introduction test suite. Maybe assign it to somebody, one of our colleagues. Maybe give it a better name here. Let's call it test run 01. Test run in TestRail, because we'll create one from Ranorex next. And we could select a specific test case. Again, you guys probably already know most of this stuff. These settings here, I could set a milestone, for instance. But let's select a specific test case here. Again, kind of a bad name there, but we'll use it. And let's add this test run. All right, so we have this. Now, if you're using TestRail currently for your manual testing, right, this is where your tester will update the status of this of their manual test, but Ranorex is going to do that for us. So again, back in the Ranorex side of things, I'm going to click that play button. We're working in the introduction project and test suite. We want to not create a new test run, but let's update an existing one that we just created there. And there it is of the name I gave it, test run 01. All right, now what we can do here is click this button to run. Of more importance, or more interest maybe, is that down here we also generate a command line. What we're actually creating in Ranorex is just an exe file. So your test is exactly that. It's an exe. So here we give it a little helper command line with all the arguments, so that if you want to integrate Ranorex, let's say, into a scheduling tool, even Windows Task Scheduler can do the job, right? We want to schedule our test run, or maybe you want to plug it into a CI environment like Jenkins, let's say. This is what you're going to utilize in order to kind of plug Ranorex into those environments. Again, it just has some arguments here, my TestRail username and password and all that good stuff. We can quickly copy this to our clipboard and run it through the command line, but let's do it kind of manually here and click the run button instead. So this is going to run my Ranorex test, and we will get the results locally as well as in TestRail. All right, it's making sure the connection to TestRail is still good. That's why it has a little kind of warm-up period there. And now we're going through the steps that we had recorded in Ranorex. So we're going to click on that username field, click Alice, and validate that we had the proper response from the UI. Now, of course, in Ranorex, you'll get this report locally as mentioned. We can take a look at all the steps. I guess of most interest to us, right, is our validation step. That was successful. We did have the appropriate value up here. We can also visually see that with our screenshot here. Looks good. But of more interest is if I go now here to TestRail. Now, I don't see any change yet because I haven't refreshed. Let's refresh this. And we'll see now that Ranorex did update that status to passed. So our automation updated that. If we want to look at the details of this, we'll see that the test case was successful. Now, if everything is successful, you just get basically, yeah, thumbs up, everything's good. We'll get more detailed information if, let's say, something goes wrong. So let's do exactly that. Let's generate a problem here in our automation. I'll just jump into that recording one module. This is where we defined our steps, right? We type in Alice. Let's make it type in Bob instead, so that when we get down here to where we validate, right, we'll be expecting welcome Alice, but we would have typed in Bob, which should give us our error. I'm going to save this and let's run it again. Rather than update our test run, our existing test run, let's maybe have Ranorex generate a new test run here. And maybe we give it a better name here. I'll keep the format TRO2, forcing a failure. And then click run. So this time we will have our failure details within the report and TestRail environment. Again, it's just checking in the beginning here to make sure the connection's okay. And then it'll kick off the test. You probably noticed there, it is just running an exe file if you look at the command prompt title there. So again, you can run your test through the UI this way or as well as command line. All right, so the results I get in Ranorex here, we see our validation failed. Welcome Bob was the actual value, but we were expecting welcome Alice. Now, when something fails in Ranorex, you do automatically get tracing screenshots so that you can kind of very quickly see visually what went wrong. But let's take a look in the TestRail side. Let's go back out to the test suite level here. We had a test run 2 there, forcing a failure. If I take a look at it, and let's see the details of it. Obviously, it's failed. And even in the TestRail side of things, we see all this debugging information. Now, I guess the most important part, right, is that we see the actual versus expected, and that value is in there as well. All right, so that is running a test from TestRail or integrated into TestRail. Let's talk now about the TestRail side of things. That is importing something you've already created in TestRail into Ranorex. So I'm going to go back out to my dashboard here. And I already have a project created in TestRail for us to use called database testing. Let's jump into there. And in this project, I have a test suite with some test cases in it. My 2 test cases here are GUI navigation test and database functionality test, so only 2 test cases. Let's take a quick look at this navigation test case. So this is kind of what you probably already have already if you're a TestRail user, right? For your manual test, you have some preconditions set here. You have some steps outlined, very simplified here, but right, select the test database tab, validate if the message test database appears in the upper left corner, and then exit. So a very, very simple test here. But we're expecting that when we click on that tab, right, that the database form should appear. And again, just to kind of let you visualize it, that just means we're launching this application. We're clicking on this test database tab, and we expect this header here, this test database title, to be there. So that's what our automation will do, but we don't have an automation yet. Let's open up a more kind of bulky project here, and we'll add this test case into it. So I close the introduction Ranorex test. I'm going to open up a bulkier one here called RX Demo App Testing. Again, this is my project folder. There's my solution. This is going to show you what more of a medium-sized test would look like in Ranorex Studio. After it loads here, You see, we already have some stuff built up on the Ranorex side only. None of these are integrated into TestRail. Again, a good indicator of that is we don't see the TestRail icon appearing here. Now I am already, I do need to maybe sign out to show you from step by step here through the wizard that we got to sign in each time. And let's now import from TestRail into Ranorex. By the way, again, we have a little more organization going on here. It's a bulkier test. Definitely recommend the webinar tomorrow to see how to do this type of organization of your modules. We have a bunch of modules to work with. We're going to use these modules to build up what we pull in from TestRail. So let's go up here to Tools. Again, we're just going to use this integration wizard here. Start the TestRail wizard. And let's import export. So again, I got to give my details, my URL, my credentials, and password. Sign in. We can continue once we're signed in. Now this time we're not going to export, we're going to take it from TestRail. We're going to import. Continue. So this is going to basically ping my TestRail instance, and from here I have to pick what project am I working in first of all. Right? We have database testing, the one I've already created. We also see the introduction one in there, the one Ranorex created. Let's work with the database testing project though. And I could choose a specific test suite from that or import all. And then click import. All right, so it shows us that 2 test cases came over from the TestRail side, right? The GUI navigation test that we just looked at and the database functionality test. Oh, yeah, I actually skipped over it. I should mention when you're creating a TestRail like the TestRail test case like this, you want to make sure that the automation type field here is set to Ranorex. So when you're creating a new test case, you will have an option here, a drop down. By default, it's just blank. You want to make sure that is set to Ranorex for us to recognize it. And then also template does matter as well. So currently we are only supporting the test case text template. We're looking into adding these others shortly. So we are definitely adding to this integration, adding new features to it. It's something we want to build up and be the best. But for now, the template should be set to text. I don't actually want to change anything about this, so I'll cancel. But again, wanted to point out that automation field is important. All right, so what happened in Ranorex once we imported here? So we have a test suite that's already been created that someone was working with. It's currently not interfacing with TestRail at all. But if we look off to the left here, we do have a new section, a new project level in here, database testing. It has the test suite as defined in TestRail, called database_testing. And there we go. We got our 2 test cases, GUI navigation test and database functionality test. Now, the workflow here, because most of you, it seems like most of you in the audience will be coming from the TestRail side. The workflow here is that as a automation engineer, as the user of Ranorex, I'm going to say, okay, I need to build this GUI navigation test up in an automated way. So I want to use this link to very quickly jump to that test case in TestRail and see my steps. Right, basically what I'm going to do is build up on the Ranorex side one-to-one with these steps. So again, this is where I mentioned the keyword names, the module names are very important here because since I already have some modules created, if they have good names corresponding to our steps, I know exactly what I need to basically work with here. So let's build this guy up. First of all, we need to start the application, right? That's definitely a first step. Got to launch the application to have a UI to work with. So I'm going to choose Start RX Demo App. And then next, I'm going to select Test Database tab. Well, I have a module here of the exact same name. Select Test Database tab. I'm going to drag that over. I'm just dropping this in the test case to build up my sequence. Select Test Database tab was next. Validate if message appears in the upper left corner. Okay, I have a module for that. Validate test database message. You can expand this to get a better look here. And last but not least, we exit the application. So I can take exit Rx demo app and drop it there. So yes, this is kind of the workflow. Again, if you're coming from TestRail already, make sure you convert those to Ranorex type test cases, and then your users in Ranorex will build up accordingly. Now, we already had these created, but of course I could also create these from scratch if I hadn't had them already. All right, so that is kind of the workflow. And if I choose to run this, right, just as before, if I run this test, maybe I'm just gonna, since I didn't build up the database functionality test at all, I'm just gonna choose the GUI navigation test by using the checkboxes here and run this. We're gonna run that. Let's make it create a new test run since we don't have one existing already. And for this project, this will be my first test run. Let's say database GUI test. I don't know. We'll just put something in there and then run. So you can see these guys work back and forth basically. While this is getting prepped to run, I see a question that just popped in. Can I write JavaScript to automate our testing on a web app? Well, you don't need to for Ranorex. So Ranorex will work through the UI of your web application, but you can call existing JavaScript, let's say in the back end of your website. But yeah, this is a codeless solution, so there's no need to write any JavaScript. You can work with our recorder functionality and build your test up that way. A little bit much easier, much faster than trying to write code, obviously. All right, our test was successful. If we jump into, let's go all the way back out to the dashboard here. We see that we did have 2 test runs of our introduction project, and now we have 1 test run of our database testing project. So if you want to see the specifics, jump into test runs. It passed. Again, if it passes, we won't get very specific information here, but if we have a failure, we would. All right, so that concludes the importing from TestRail, and also showed you how to build up the Ranorex test case by dragging those modules in. Again, tomorrow we'll show you the very minutia of building those up step by step, those recording modules. But for now, we kept it at a high level. Last little topic before we get into the summary. I know we're at time here, so this will be a quick one. What is synchronization? So once my Ranorex project is synchronized with TestRail, you have a little sync button on your toolbar. Basically, anytime you create a new test case or modify the structure, you will be able to synchronize and see the updates in both environments. So let me demonstrate here real quick. Right, in Ranorex here, this project, not this project, but the database testing one, is synchronized or connected to TestRail, so that if I choose to create a new test case here, new from Ranorex we'll call it, and then build it up with some modules. Again, I'm just going to throw something in there for now since we won't be running it. And then I choose the synchronize button. So in the toolbar here, I have a little synchronize. If I click it, it will show me that there is no change on the Ranorex side, obviously, because we're looking at it. We created that change, but the difference between this side and the TestRail side is that we have this new from Ranorex test case that we need to add. This is just telling me that it's if I choose to synchronize, it's going to add that to my project in TestRail. So let's jump back out and confirm that happened. If I look at my dashboard here, database testing, there's our test runs. I'm looking for cases. There's our new from Ranorex test case. Now, depending on what I put in there, right, it's going to show me my sequence. Again, those steps, those recording module names, the more meaningful they are, the better your steps will look when you're importing into TestRail like this. And vice versa, if I create a new test case in here from TestRail, I'll add a new test case. Again, we want to call it new from TestRail. Again, you want to make sure to check this or set this automation type field to Ranorex. And then that's all I'll do. Let's just quickly save it. All right, so we successfully added it. Now in Ranorex, we don't see that yet, obviously. So we need to synchronize. And automatically, we have new from TestRail added to our test suite structure. So this is your back and forth refresh, basically. That is the final short topic. We were able to get through our agenda here. Let me quickly introduce some summary slides. I know we're at time. I do want to open up for a few questions. Definitely check out our user guide online. There is a nice section, at least initially, to check out called Fundamentals. It'll get you up and started and dangerous in Ranorex very quickly. Specifically in the user guide, there is a section showing exactly what I just showed here. So for your reference, if you prefer documentation, if you're a documentation person like I am, and you go to our website in the support resources section here, we'll have the user guide. And we have, as you can see here, a bunch of different topics. But if you look for connectivity and integrations, you'll see TestRail in there as well.
Yeah, actually support, if you go to Support Help Center, that's where you'll find the user guide.
Ah, good point. That is a quicker way to get there. Support and Help Center. And there's a big green button. That's a little more direct for sure. So let me get back to my slides here. As mentioned, we will include we'll have a follow-up email including a link to download this video coming at you after the webinar here. Any questions you may have that we can't get to today, certainly feel free to reply to this email and we will be happy to answer. As mentioned, we do have other webinars. If you want to learn more about the Ranorex side of things, definitely check out the webinars happening this week. We have one for desktop, one for web, and one for mobile. You can also watch them on demand. There's also, as I just went into, a resources section under support there that has screencasts, blog posts, all kinds of stuff. That is very helpful as well. I'm going to get to questions. I know we're at time, so for anyone who does have a hard stop, let me just quickly mention that we do have a 30-day trial for you to download. Definitely check out, it's a fully functional trial of Ranorex Studio. So definitely check it out if you're interested, and you can even practice this integration using that trial. For those of you who have to go, thank you for your attention. I will stick around for questions, but definitely check out our other webinars. You also have my contact information down there if you come up with any questions offline. Outside of this presentation, certainly feel free to email me directly as well. And yeah, so thanks everyone, and let's look at the questions panel and see what we have for those who can stick around a few more minutes.
Hey Jay, this is Josh. Yes, there are a number of questions still pending here, and there's a couple of topics I wanted to bring up to your attention.
Perfect.
One was taking a look at the test results we get back in TestRail, the steps that we see. That would be the names of the modules, is that correct?
That is correct, yes, and that is why it's actually pretty important that, let me show the one we just created here. Whoops, test cases. Right, we just showed that we synchronized this new test case over, and all you'll have in steps when you create a test case in Ranorex and export it into TestRail, the steps that will be created. Now you can modify these, of course, but boilerplate, you'll get the recording module name. So they're one-to-one here. Button add entry, delete one entry, and insert age. So definitely what you name these modules in Ranorex is important. Great question. Any other good ones that came up?
Yes, let's see here. Is there any way to separate the view of automated results versus manual results in TestRail?
Ooh, good question. I don't believe there is.
Okay.
You know, if you could kind of do it yourself, right? Remember, we could pick the name of our test run if we want Ranorex to create a new one. So if I ran this and I would want to do new test run, I could say, you know, give it like a keyword here, like automated, something like that. So you can kind of manage that. But as far as filtering, no, there's no way to filter, you know, only automated test or only manual test yet. That would be something on the TestRail side they would develop. Let's see.
There's a question.
Go ahead.
From Pablo, can the synchronization be scheduled to run periodically outside of Ranorex Studio? Maybe like Jenkins or something like that?
Yes, you can actually. So I believe, let me double check on that. There should be a command line argument, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just quickly check all the command line arguments we have here. So the TestRail arguments. I believe logging in, we can define a run name. No, it doesn't appear that there is a way to synchronize that, so you will have to kind of, you know, at a periodic time, synchronize manually. I see what the question is getting at, though, because you want to, in your CI environment, right, you want it to kind of update with the latest and greatest. So probably a good approach to that would be, you know, kind of timed or scheduled manual synchronizations to make sure that your project you have living in Jenkins, let's say, your CI environment, is fully, you know, up to date with what you see in TestRail. Good question. I like that, though. That might be a good feature request. What else do we have here? Some good ones about Ranorex. Definitely check out our webinars on the different topics. Let's see. Well, I think we got most of them out of the way. My engineers did a great job of answering questions kind of on demand there, and they're great answers. So very good. As mentioned, though, of course, if you ever have any questions, you'll get a follow-up email. Definitely feel free to email us. Just reply to that email, and you'll get to the right place. Or myself, you can email directly as well. I don't see any other questions coming in that, well, maybe I am wrong about that. Let me scroll down here. It's actually a bunch of questions that just got asked. Unfortunately, we're at time, so for the interest of the video, we'll wrap it up here. But definitely, anything that's open, certainly feel free to get in contact with us, either through that automatic email or myself directly, and we'll get you to the right place. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. I hope you have a terrific week, and hope to see you again in some of our other webinars. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye now.